working on a program based in Mongolia. I am not based in Mongolia. I'm part of a regional team that has several programs, but in 3 years I've been out 20 or 25 times, so I'm more or less fully integrated into the team. But anything that sounds impressive, compliments go to our team in UB, which has been a very hardworking and able group. A couple of confessions. I'm glad I'm in this group because we do not have a demand-side coalition. I think you could say that we have coalitions, and we have certainly accessed and worked with the demand side, or community participation has been a fundamental aspect of the program. But we don't talk about coalitions or use the coalition language. And maybe it's just how we think about coalitions. I think we have coalitions within different government agencies, because obviously government is in no ways unitary, even in an urban space like we work at the city. But it's slightly different for sure. The third thing that I think is a confession of sorts is that we're not satisfied with what we have done. We are proud of what we've done, and the team in UB should be praised for the hard work. But what we have done, and I'll explain a couple of the accomplishments, still sound a bit like process achievements. And it's not to say that we don't believe that those process achievements aren't going to translate into impact in the future. But as this project is ongoing, I don't have a data here to show you. And because we're talking about uncertainty, there are assumptions and conceptual leaps required to understand fully why we firmly believe that things that are being accomplished, even as we speak, we have a couple of small pieces of regulatory reform in front of the city parliament. It's still in process, and so I don't want to overstate things at all. The three major accomplishments of the city of UB that our team has in some ways contributed to that I'd like to talk about or reference are first, there's been a fairly comprehensive move on solid waste reform. So it comprises of, on paper, a resolution by the mayor, a regulatory reform of an existing city regulation, and several rules and recontracting templates for all the solid waste management companies in the city. How we got there is a long story. In 7 minutes I probably won't get there, but that's the kind of centerpiece of the solid waste reform work. The second piece is on economic development. There was a participatory dialogue between the public sector and the private sector, more or less for the first time at the city level in Mongolia. And it resulted in an economic development strategy, and that is actually what is being considered by the citizens Hural today, or tomorrow, I think. And that will flow into a number of policy moves on economic development for the city. The third thing that has happened is there have been 2 satellite cities created from within the city's territory. This is the first step in a broader restructuring process. So these were created by referendum and had significant public support, and they now have their own city charters, and the government is making the first moves to introduce new structures that will separate some of the politics from the operational side of service delivery. And that's a big first step, but it's part of a longer process of restructuring the entire city that will take a number of years and cross over into the next administration. So those are the 3 big things, and I think they sound like quite disparate things. And you're probably wondering, where did we start from? I think the main thing to know about Mongolia, in 2 seconds of context: 3 million people, 1.5 million more or less live in the capital city. Half of those 1.5 million more or less are living in unplanned settlements. So that's 25% of the entire country's population is living in unplanned settlements in the capital city. So our mandate was very simple: improve service delivery to the residents of the unplanned settlements of UB. We are working within this DFAT-TAF partnership structure that Bill Cole briefly described in the previous session. And so we really had that much flexibility. From that starting point, obviously it had ballooned out to things that seem obviously related to service delivery, but not directly related to a service. We do have our one service, which is the solid waste reform, but the other things are related but quite different. But we started from a relationship building approach. We did not have the mandate to work inside government, or we were not required to work with government as closely as we did, but there was a change in administration that seemed to provide an opportunity. And we started not with any solutions or not with any half-baked efforts on our part to decide what should be done. But we went in and we just asked our main counterpart, who's the new mayor of UB. Now he's the old mayor of UB. He's still there, but it's been 3 odd years now. And he basically laid out some of his policy objectives, which isn't an uncommon thing to do, except that we made a very strong effort in the very beginning to listen, understand, make linkages between some of our stated objectives, which were still being formed, and his policy platform in a way that allowed us to engage a locally owned process that was ongoing, an organically developing reform process, and support it with ideas from the broader community of stakeholders in Mongolia, as well as from our own team. In the process that we undertook, I think we've been extremely flexible. We've been adding pieces, as you can tell. We just had service delivery. We now have economic reform. The conceptual link can be described, but not in a minute and 20 seconds. But basically, services and development in the GARE areas require some economic growth there for citizens to invest in their own spaces. I think the nature of the way we decide to work has a lot to do with my read on how cities work. It's quite a different thing to work in a city than work in a national government context. The leaders of a city, almost any issue converges very quickly onto 3, 4, 5 decision makers. In a national government context, you can have a few different projects working with ministers, pieces that never talk to each other. In a city, if you're working on economic development, if you're working on service delivery, if you're working on almost anything, you end up with the same 3 or 4 people. And because we invested so much in understanding them, relating to them, and making sure that our priorities were connected to them, we had a massive scope to expand into issues that they never saw as separate, because the city is the city. They're looking at it as a system, and coming in as an outsider with one small piece of that system you want to engage ultimately limits the relationships you can build in the partnership. What has been hard about this? The constant adjustment is easy for some and very difficult for others. One of the hardest things that we found in 4 seconds is that one of the things that we don't know about when you're changing strategy is when do you have a failure in implementation and when do you have a failure in idea? Because they have very different ramifications for how you're going to react. Most people who propose an idea, invest in an idea, and really put work into it are going to be very hesitant to say the idea didn't work. It's just something wrong with the implementation. We need to talk to these 3 or 4 more people, and you keep on piling in and investing. One of the main things that we've done to overcome this challenge is try and make sure that ideas within our team are collective. And our team, I describe that as not just our team members, is also our counterparts in government and civil society that we have worked with. But one of the things that we found most challenging is having a context where ideas are not owned, they're not judged, no one feels like they have to defend it to the death. It's about making sure that they're always being forward-looking and making sure that people are willing to question their assumptions and move forward. So apologies, I didn't get to a lot of my lessons, but I'm going to make Dan ask me a question on those, because Dan has been researching our project, and hopefully we're going to get a paper from ODI that tells us that there is something interesting there. Thank you.